Welcome to Simply Walk the Talk. Our bodies and minds adapt to what we do most of the time. If you want to change your body and mind, you must change what it is you do most of the time. This podcast explores all things health, wellness, fitness, lifestyle, and biohacking. Stay tuned as we explore various thoughts, methods, and experiences from a multitude of conversations between our interesting guests and experts through many fields of work. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Simply walk the talk. Simply walk the talk.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy, Josh Holland, with another wonderful episode of Simply Walk the Talk. Today, I have a special guest, and we are on location here at Karneval Film in Budapest, Hungary. Beautiful place and beautiful guest. So my guest with me today is Peter Lakatos. I bet it's pronounced Peter. Is it Peter or Peter? Peter Lakatos. And Peter he's definitely one to know. So if you're listening to this intro, I want you to make sure to pause this, grab a pen and paper. Let's take some notes because this guy is very, very well known in terms of health, wellness, fitness, lifestyle, all the things that I like to do and talk about. He's the man here, especially in Hungary. We got introduced by Steven Munitones of Katsu. We had him on the show as well. So if you've listened to a previous episode when I had the guys from Katsu on, Steven is the one who introduced us. And I reached out to these guys because I was like, hey, I've got this crowdfunding campaign for the book, and I'd love your support in any way possible. And they were like, wait, you're in Budapest? Well, we got the perfect guy you got to meet with. Steven was like, yeah, this guy trains some of the most elite athletes and high profile people there in Budapest or in Hungary. You definitely need to catch up with him while you're there. And so I said, okay, yeah, like let's meet up and let's talk. And right away we connected, and we've now, for the last couple of weeks, we've even had a chance to break bread together at your place in the countryside. And I've connected with your son, who's an amazing young director and is doing some really cool things. We're going to be doing some work together as well. So long intro, long preamble, but welcome to the show, Mr. Peter Lakatos.
Thank you for inviting.
Yeah, of course. So why don't you give the audience, we're recording on location here, but for those who aren't watching the video, let's keep in mind that some of the things that we're going to talk about. We have some cool bits of kit on the table here. We've got the blood flow restriction or blood flow moderation in the form of Katsu. I have the new Katsu C3 device here on the table. I know you're a big fan of as well. We've got some isometric contraction devices in the form of isobo. And I have this amazing gi, this jiu-jitsu gi that you created and you've gifted to me, which is so amazing. We'll talk about why. And I just think if you're listening to this point right now, we're going to talk about breath work. We're going to talk about grappling and jiu-jitsu, blood flow restriction, and a whole multitude of things. But why don't you give listeners a little sense of your background?
Okay, so my background is basically sport. So I was an athlete, professional athlete, and then I made a complete switch. I went to a big company, HBO, and started to work for them. And I became one of the top manager for HBO in Hungary. And then I got really, fed up with the whole, all these big companies' attitude. So I decided to go back to the roots and started to teach again. Started to go to certification, basically relearning the profession of being a coach, because I was out of the game for about 15 years and started to coach different people, teams, athletes, and average people.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? There's a lot of people forget or don't know that there's a difference between being an athlete being a coach or being sort of a mixture of the two, you know? And I think this is where, like when I first got my training with Vivo Barefoot, you know, they talked about the athlete. So it's cool to be an athlete. And, you know, I was an athlete like you. And then I sort of became like the coach or the scientist, in which I was really just diving into the research and all these things. But then when you dive so much into one side of it, you kind of forget the athlete side of it, right? But where we want to fall is somewhere in the middle. And I feel like that's really, really cool. What was your sort of like breakthrough moment in which you kind of started to see that things were really clicking for you in terms of what you do now?
So one of the big thing was for me that definitely FMS was one of them. I mean, there was many, but FMS was something that it was a big aha moment, right? Because
and that's functional movement screening,
correct,
right?
by Greg Cook, yes. So because you know when you are a coach, it's one of the biggest questions. I mean, your toolbox is just growing by years, and it's bigger and bigger. And the bigger the box is not definite. It doesn't mean that you're a better coach. You just have more stuff to use, but how to use it, when to use it, that's the big question. So FMS just made everything, you know, in an order, because it says that you do the screen and that you know pretty much what not to do. And it's not really about what to do, but what not to do. And then you're saving so much time for yourself and for the athlete. So probably that was the first one when I was like, okay, I have so many certifications and input, but how to put it into the right order? That was the number one question. So when it got cleared, it was easier to move forward, because that was easy to understand. Where I want to go is basically movement-based training and not really muscle-based training.
Well said. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up FMS, because FMS was also a breakthrough moment for me in my career, in which I thought, wow, this is a tool, you know, a screen or an assessment. It's a tool in which you can go, oh, I can check off here and I can check off there, and I can see how a person progresses over time. And I know we talked about this before, but it's also what ultimately led me into developing the MAP, which is movement analysis pattern. And what I did was I kind of used FMS as a foundation, and then I wanted to create something that could be done anywhere, anytime, without any kit, without any tools. But doesn't mean that FMS is not useful. It's very, very useful, and I use it a lot. But I also like to be able to offer people an opportunity to try something literally right now. So like if we wanted to assess ourselves right now, what would that look like, right? But I think it's cool that FMS was a big part of both of our growth, if you will. What else would you identify as another bit of growth?
Yeah, so pretty early I went to the then it called Russian Kettlebell Challenge, now it's called Strong First. So I went to the certification in 2006 by Pavel Tsatsouline, and again it was just one simple tool. So it's very difficult to understand that, like in that 3-day certification, you basically learn 6 exercises, while you know in many other certifications in 3 days you learn probably 120 exercises. So and then you start to think like, oh, so 120 is probably more valuable, but then actually the 6 is a lot more valuable in this case, and not because of kettlebells, because kettlebells is just it's a decoy. I have to tell you, the whole thing is the principles which we teach with kettlebell. But it's a whole different ballgame when you learn 120 exercises but no principles. Or you learn 6 very well and you have all the principles you can apply to any kind of things you will do in the future. So I started to study with them, and over the time I became Master Instructor by Pavel, and I'm teaching certifications all around the world. So that was, you know, very, very interesting thing. And it was very tough, to be honest. As an athlete, I thought it would be much easier to get prepared for the certification. And it was definitely very painful experience.
I've heard a lot. I've not gone down the path of certifying, but yeah. So I've definitely looked at some of the workouts and protocols that are required or suggested to kind of prepare you for the certifications. And I was like, yeah, let me try this out because, I went through this moment of being really involved in CrossFit. So, you hear CrossFit and then you hear kettlebells in CrossFit and then you hear like RKC and Strong First. And it's like, yeah, let me give one of these workouts a shot. And I was like, oh no, oh no, I got to really, really properly prepare for this. But that's really cool that you do that. So you also provide training for FMS still too, right?
Yeah, so we run certifications in Hungary, and I'm also many times I'm invited to the surrounding countries. I was teaching in Slovakia and Czech, even Israel and Italy. I was teaching certifications. Yeah.
So there's FMS, there's RKC, Strong First, kettlebell training. What else is under your belt, man? This belt is
so in 2002 I decided to pick up Krav Maga and just for the sake of it, and then and I basically for about 15 years I went to Israel twice a year. The head teacher Eyal Yanilov came to Hungary many times. He's a family member now. And so I started to study Krav Maga. And this was already still in a time when I was still at HBO, right? So it was kind of like I started to see like probably that's not what I want to do. I mean, HBO, no, nobody should feel offended about HBO. It's a great company, but then I started to see like okay, so probably I could make an impact through Krav Maga, which we did basically because we started and we became a pretty nice organization in Hungary. So that's another thing, which we started with our group.
So was that your first with Krav Maga? Was that your first foray into the arts, martial arts? Yeah.
I mean, I did something before, some karate, which is Wado-ryu, and some Wing Chun, but I wouldn't call it like I was an expert level by any means.
Got it. Okay. So we went from FMS, kettlebells, Krav Maga, then what?
So then I was ready for my black belt test for Krav Maga, and then I figured out my grappling part, the ground fighting part is definitely my weakness. So one of my best friend, who was the first black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Hungary, he was asking me for years, seriously for years, that you should come and learn from me, which I always said, no, I'm not interested in grappling. But anyway, so I was like, I'll pick it up for just to feel more comfortable on the ground for the exam, right? And then, so I stuck there and I with the Carlson Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and then I got the black belt 3 years ago. So all I wanted to do is just have a couple of weeks of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and just move forward, but I got stuck.
Well, I mean, the way you just described that, I think people listening they're gonna go, "Wow, a few weeks, you got a black belt?" No. Like it took a lot of work, right? Because you told me this story a bit.
Yeah, it was funny that when I had the first, and again, reminder, he's one of my best friends, right? So I think he was more happy to pull me in than I was to go there, because he felt like, finally he's here. And the first day when I had my first training, right, then he told me like, well, if you keep coming back, I guarantee, with your background and my help, his help, I guarantee in 10 years you get black belt. And I was like, when you just got choked out like 30 times probably, it doesn't sound like it's gonna ever happen, right? So you're like, yeah, whatever. And seriously, as I started to work through the whole curriculum, my goal was like, yeah, okay, possibly I go to blue belt. And the reason was very simple. I was rolling with blue belts and they destroyed me, right? With my 10 years of different martial arts background. So I was like, yeah, these blue belts are animals. So I think blue belt is good. But I'm done. That's it. And then I got the blue belt. I was like, oh, wait a second. So now what? Right? And I understand so many people are actually stopping Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at blue belt. Like something like 75% of practitioners stop at blue belt because they're like, wow, now what? Right? And then, but he was so motivating. So seriously, when after like 10 years, and I don't know by the date it was 10 years, but definitely it was 10 years, he gave me the black belt and he said like, so you remember what I told you 10 years ago? I'm like, yeah, I do. I'm like, so what do you think? I'm like, wow, this is amazing.
But that's perseverance. That's discipline. That's fortitude. Sticking with it.
But also, again, I don't think you can go far in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or in any martial arts without a good master. I mean, your motivation has end. And many times, seriously, none of the belts I got in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is something I deserved. And I'm very proud of that, because I never felt like, when they gave me the belt, I was the one in the room who was the most surprised.
Wow.
Because simply that he always gave me earlier than I would feel I deserved it. And it's a different feeling, because then when you feel you deserved it, that's, you almost demand it, like, you should give it to me. Seriously.
Expected, right?
Exactly. But every single belt I got in the right time, when I was my focus started to fade somehow, and then he gave me like, you don't deserve it. He never said that, but I felt like you don't deserve yet, but I give it to you as advance, so you have to work for it.
Wow.
So I think it's pretty cool.
That's a very interesting situation, because I've talked about this before on my show, and I've talked about it on other interviews in which I was interviewed on other people's shows. So I grew up in martial arts, and my father owns a karate school in my hometown, and my dad was so tough on my brother and I, and the average child, or person, I should say, because it's not just kids that start with us, but the average person should take about 2 months to go from a white belt to a yellow belt, right? So you get the white belt and then 3 stripes, which shows that you learned a certain segment to get your stripe. So like you learn forms or katas, you learn fighting, you learn breaking, and then you do the whole test to get the belt. And that usually takes on average about 2 months if you do it the way that it's supposed to be done. You come to every single class, blah, blah, blah. It took my brother and I 2 years. 2 years. And so it's like when you said you got your belt before, and how that was a certain motivation, I also feel like, my brother and I, we far exceeded the expectation. It was way beyond the expectation, because we're like, well, we expected it a year ago and we still don't have it. Okay, you know what? We're going to get it at some point. Maybe, right? But that's very, very powerful. It's a really cool story. 10 years. I've practiced jiu-jitsu a bit off and on. I can't imagine 10 years of it, but one day maybe I will. Maybe, I'm about to be 40. So maybe by 50, I have a gi here, thanks to you. We talked about, I guess I can put this up. This is a beautiful bamboo gi that Peter has given me. And I think this is also going to be just motivation to make sure we train. Because, one of the things I loved about our conversation when I was at your house was, yeah, I'm here in Budapest, but I don't have a gi with me. I'd love to train with you. I was planning on bringing my gi from New York, but the trip never panned out. And you're like, here's your gi. It's like, now shut up, let's train, right? So thank you for this. This is amazing. It's beautiful. And your company designs this?
Yeah.
So tell me a bit more about it.
We just wanted to have a brand that we make the cut. It's we feel comfortable in it. It's very light. It's from bamboo, like 75% of the bamboo material. So it dries very fast. It's antibacterial, so that's also a pretty good stuff. And it's very light. So that's the reason we like it. And it's very hard to tear. So
it is very light, actually. And the drying very fast component is very important, right? Because when you really properly train in jiu-jitsu, you sweat. It's a sweat fest.
Yeah, and it's summer here, so it starts to get hot. Yeah.
Even in the studio, I feel how warm it is, right? And this also comes with a nice little bag. Like, man, I feel honored. I feel like I just got promoted to black belt. I got promoted to black.
And the funny thing is the estrada in Portuguese means broken ear, like, the cauliflower.
Ah, I didn't know that. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Honestly, this is cool. This definitely will motivate me to get to training. So, all right, let's move on to some talk about blood flow moderation. And of course, if we've missed anything in terms of your martial arts background and things like that, feel free to throw that in there. But one of the main reasons why we got connected, I feel like, is because of blood flow moderation. So let's talk about how you use blood flow moderation and maybe how you first came acquainted with it and how you use it.
Oh yeah. So first, when I heard about it, I mean, seriously, if you read the marketing material, it sounds way too good. I mean, seriously, like you read it like, no, it cannot be true. I mean, seriously. And then you start to read probably a few researches if you are like, more like a scientist mind. And it's like, oh, wait a second. So since the 90s, they have pretty amazing researches. I mean, what the Japanese put out are pretty amazing. Let it be older individuals training, even high-level athletes. And then, so it was very convincing, to be honest. And then I was like, okay, so if it's that good as they say it, I think I should invest some money in it. And at that point, it was pretty expensive. I mean, we've been discussing that, like the master unit was something like $6,000. So that was not cheap. But I was like, well, I checked around in Hungary or the other countries that if anybody has it, nobody knew about it, right? So I'm like, okay, so maybe I am the one who should start helping the company to spread, which we did, by the way. And I started to use it, and it came especially in a time when I was suffering a lot from neck herniation. So it was very difficult to train, and especially keeping muscles on. So I was like, okay, so that's the best time probably, because that's what they promise, right? Yeah. With a very low weight, you can train and you can maintain muscle mass or even grow muscle mass. So like, okay, so let's see. And the result came very fast, very like, okay, so I'm sold on it. So after that, I started to my black belt instructor. So I took it to him like, okay, so you have to see this. I mean, even I bought a unit for him. I'm like, this is so good. You have to try it. Yeah. And he was like, okay, let's do it. So that was something like 8 years ago. And he's still using it. He still loves it. Really? And yeah, he's just like 2-3 times a week. He loves it. So and he is one of the most skeptical person you can imagine. So if that unit passed a test with him, I think anybody, yeah, could.
It's definitely, I agree, because even for myself, when I first got introduced to it, one of the first guys I had on the podcast in terms of blood flow restriction was one of the creators of just the straps, just the basic straps. And when I interviewed him, I was like, oh man, this is amazing. Like you said, like I was reading the research. He showed me a bunch of videos and a bunch of, research that kind of talked about what his product was supposed to do or deliver. And then I realized that, wait a minute, a lot of the research that he was using comes from Katsu, right? So Dr. Soto, right? Sato, sorry. Dr. Sato, he's a pioneer in terms of what we have now today. And it's, it's fine. There's obviously going to be lots of different brands and knockoffs, if you will. But in general, let's talk about some of the science of it, because this is why I feel like people should know about it and then make the decision on buying something, investing into a Katsu or maybe some of the other devices out there, because there's a lot out there. In fact, before we recorded today, I was talking to you about fit cuffs. And I do use fit cuffs. I happen to use Katsu much more frequently than I ever do use fit cuffs. But there's some workouts in which I feel like the effect that I'm looking for physiologically in the legs, I can I can get there quicker with the fit cuffs sometimes, but it's not always the case. And it also depends on what type of exercise. So let's talk about that. And then, we can maybe discuss this new unit.
So I think the differentiation is very simple. You use K2 for recovery or use it for training. So, and this is no other units can offer. Because you can use it as they call it cycle mode, which is you just put it on, it's pulsing. So it's pulsing for 20 seconds on and 5 seconds off. And this is what we see when people are talking about like detox. Like it's a big name, right? You should detox your body. I mean, it's not a definite medical term, but whatever. But you definitely need your lymphatic system for detoxing. And most people are so inactive. So how do you make the lymphatic fluid to move? And that's what K2 is doing basically. So as it pumps up and release, pumps up and release, it will especially you put on your legs, on your arms, where the lymphatic nodes are, right?
Yes.
So that's, I think for most people, that's the most important part. Is the cycle. I know everybody talks about the pumps and talks about hypertrophy, which is great, but the cycle is the bread and butter of blood flow moderation training. Now, if we talk about training, that's a different issue because, again, if you want to have good effect with weight training, you definitely need weight.
Yes.
And knowing that how bad generally the population is moving. So before I can put enough load on the movement, I have to teach them basically to move, which most people cannot.
Right.
So before I would risk their health with complex movements, putting on the cuffs and reaching the reasonable pressure, which is up to you, up to your current physiology, muscle mass, capillaries, and also hydration. So then basically I can give you a pretty amazing training without using heavy weight.
Right.
And it's either if it's because you're an injured athlete, it's really good, so you can maintain your muscle mass and strength, or you are older individual who is bedridden and cannot move.
Right.
Either way, it's a good stuff. And the science behind it is well, there's a whole book about the whole science, right? So I'm trying to bastardize the whole thing, but basically we create a very high acidity because we are not closing but modifying the blood flow, especially we're modifying the venous return and not the artery.
Yes.
And through that we create hypoxia and we create acidosis, right? And because the body wants to adapt, because the number one goal is survival, so the body will adapt to this very funky but well-known physiological fact: when you have no oxygen, the fast twitch muscle fibers should turn on.
Yeah.
Now, normally fast twitch type fibers turn on only if you lift heavy weight or lift moderate weight with high speed.
Right.
So these are the two only options. Unless there is no oxygen, so kind of like tricking the muscle fibers, because they are, let's face it, they are dumb. so you can trick it and say like, well, actually you are lifting heavy weight, right? It's kind of like a Jedi mind trick.
Right.
And the muscle is like, yeah, sure. And so all the fast twitch will turn on, which is pretty good. And so you're enjoying the benefit of using all the fibers or most of the fibers without having a substantial load on your spine or joints. Mm-hmm. And for some people, that's the only option to get trained, to be honest. For other people, it's helping to lower the weekly load. Sometimes that's pretty good. So that's finishing the last two sets in K2. So lifting really heavy, and last two sets probably go kind of like all out.
Yeah.
That's also very good stuff. But we had high-level athletes. Currently, they are at a high, getting ready for the Olympics. So he had a Achilles tendon torn, and that was like 2 years ago. And the only thing he was doing for weeks is just walking in the K2.
Yeah.
Just walking. That was it. And
cycle mode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And his recovery was almost like 50% shorter than it was projected. That's pretty cool.
That's very cool. Yeah, I mean, especially when you're at that level, because recovery is everything. And this is what a lot of people don't understand unless you're at the elite level or you're well informed. But recovery sometimes is where you make all of the benefits. And so if you can speed up a person's recovery, then I think that's worth it as much as the workout itself. So while you were explaining that, I strapped these on so that the people who are watching, they can see. I have this here on my upper arm, basically as high up as I can go, right? And I strapped it on, and then we've got you turn on the device here, and what happens is, so this is the base pressure, right? The base pressure is what you strap it on at. And that may change from time to time, but the more you use it, the more you kind of understand, like, okay, that's about tight enough for the base pressure. And I like to have a snug base pressure. And then, you can choose, if you have the new C3, you can choose between cycle mode. Of course, you can do it with the other system as well, right? You can choose, what is that one called? Is that is there a name for that one? The one before this? I can't remember.
So we when we set up, basically, yes, there's a base SKU, standard Katsu unit. That's the name. And that is how it's measuring, the machine is measuring. And then basically we will reach the one which we use for the training. So this is what we are trying to set somehow, because we want to have the optimum pressure for the training, and not too much, not too little, like, everybody knows these rules.
Yes. Yeah, I think it was important to reiterate what you mentioned in terms of the sort of gold or the main play here, and the difference between, let's say, Katsu and all the other blood flow moderation or blood flow restriction devices is that this has the cycle mode. And so I'm going to show you that now. So the cycle mode, basically, we strap this on and you can use it as a warm up. This is what I always do before every training, is I use it as warm up, or you can use it as recovery. And the thing I like about this new C3 device is you can choose how many cycles you want to do it, versus the other unit, the previous unit, you would just have to, once the cycle's finished, you just select it again and do it, which is not that big of a deal. But if you want to do meditation, or you want to not fuss around with having to push this and multitask, then you can set that on here. So I'm choosing cycle mode. That's the one that's going to pump up and then release, and then pump up and release. So I'm going to choose cycle. And then we have the arms position. So you can go either arms or legs. Obviously, I'm going to choose arms because these are on my arms. And one thing I will say is that with Katsu, they always suggest not to ever do arms and legs at the same time. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of hard to do that anyway, because you don't have two devices to be able to do that. But just keep that in mind. We always want to do just the arms. And we usually start with the arms first, cycle mode, warm up, and then go into training and then do legs. So we got the arms position. And then I can choose low, the low range, which is 80 SKU to 150. Or we can go to the medium range, which is 130 SKU to 200. Or the high range, which is 180 to 250. And then on this one, they even have a custom SKU range, which is pretty cool. So what I usually do, we'll start with low. And then I'll choose one set for right now. And you can hear what this sounds like. So if you're listening only, just know that I have these straps connected to, it's like blood pressure cuffs, thin blood pressure cuffs around the arms, around the upper arms. And the tubes connect to this little pager-like device, right? That allows for this flow of pressure, right? So it puts air into the cuffs, and then it releases the air, and then puts more air into the cuffs, and then releases the air. And that's what's getting that physiological change to happen in the body. And one of the analogies I use is very similar to yours, but is because the arterial flow is still happening, the blood is still rushing into the limbs, right? The blood is still going into the arms, and you can kind of start to see the color, right? It starts to get really red. You start to see the veins pop a little bit more. And the venous return is being moderated though. So the blood is unable to escape as well as it would normally, right? And that's what triggers this this flood of chemical release of nitric oxide in the body to allow the blood vessels to open up a little bit more so that we could correct that moderation of the venous return, right? And this is what I find most people relate to, because they're like, oh, so that's why it feels like my arms are about to burst. You know, we do the capillary refill check, right? And we show people that if you can poke the palm of your hand and the blood comes back within 2 seconds, everything is okay. And what I notice is a lot of times people, they will do that thinking that their arms, like, okay, Josh, are you sure this is okay? Are you sure? I'm like, just do the capillary refill test. They do it and it comes back in like half a second. And I'm like, see, this is now showing that your circulation is improving. So this is one of those tools I think people should really start to understand and know the difference between just strapping on something on your arms versus this cycle mode. So if you hear this audio, I don't know if it's audible right now, but it's pulsing up, and if I were to squeeze my arms a little bit, I can really feel this. This buzzing starts to change, right? Because it's adjusting to what I'm doing. So if I'm just sitting here, then that's going to be at one level. But if I'm kind of squeezing my hands or I'm doing this bicep flexion while I'm sitting down or standing up, this is going to change because it wants to keep it at a certain number for a certain period of time. So anyway.
And just one thing, it's very funny. I had one of the coach in my place, and he's a non-believer in this whole thing. He said it's definitely BS. And so I just put the right pressure on just one arm, right? The other arm was not cuffed, right? And he got like 2 5 kilos dumbbell. And I start pumping. And it was like, okay, what's going to happen? Like, you don't believe it. So if you think it doesn't make any difference, you could do a same amount of curls, right? And it's like, yeah, true. So it was very funny that it was visible that the cuffed arm started to slow down. And then suddenly it was 2 different rhythm. And then at one point he couldn't even do any more with the left, which was cuffed, but with the right, it was keep going. I was like, so what do you think? I was like, I'm sold. It's like, that's it.
That's a great test, actually. And now, especially, I'm glad you brought that up, because with this new C3 device, there's a plug in which you can plug one side and train just one limb. Because I would assume with the system you had with him, you probably just had to leave the other one inflating on its own.
No, I just put their left.
Oh,
so
okay.
that was the old Nano.
Perfect. Yeah, that's really cool. Really cool. So there you go. Any of the non-believers, just come and holler at one of us, and we'll see if we can make you a believer. It's a really cool device and type of training. So the cycle we exhausted. I think we talked about kind of the benefits of that. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop this. Let's talk about the training mode now. So training mode, you quickly went over it and talked about how it pumps up, and you can choose the level in which you want it to pump up. And the goal there is that it stays inflated, but then you can untether, and then you can go swimming with it. Mm-hmm. You can do any kind of like most exercise forms, but we usually suggest not heavy training because you don't need to, right? You're going to get that effect anyway. But tell me some ways that you use it and maybe some of the science behind it.
I like to use it, the very basic recommendation. I mean, most of the research are on the very easy 30, 15, 15, 15 reps between 20 to 30 seconds as a break or pause. And then finding an exercise where around the third and fourth set, let's say the last 5 reps are very difficult or even impossible. Mm-hmm. So that will be, again, it's a progression. I don't start right away with people. Yeah. But like, let's say 2-3 months later, probably they go to movement failure. I mean, not total failure, just technical failure. Let's put it that way. But with high-level athletes, I mean, like with the water polo team, Hungarian water polo team, we do use katsu sometimes. And what they do is they put the katsu, they go into the water, and then they start swimming, let's say just by the arm. So they start to feel the very strong acidosis, right? Mm-hmm. Which is, they are pretty fit. So normally you should work for that type of feeling a little bit, but in Katsu they fill it like in 2-3 minutes, and then we ask them to start shooting the balls, and then because they
with the cuffs on.
Oh yeah. And then they always say like this is like the end of the game when I'm super tired and 2-3 Serbians are hanging on me, and it's like that's the feeling. I'm like, okay, that's what we wanted to do. So one of my friend is a coach. He's responsible for that. He took it to the volleyball team. His name is Gergő, and then he came up with all these ideas, and I'm sure they hate him, but it's very relevant for what they do.
Yeah, it's so cool. I mean, and I think that's important, like what you just mentioned, in that it's a way to mimic a certain type of training, right? It because you could either go and get a bunch of guys and hang on them to mimic it in that way, which is kind of like we would do that in basketball. I played basketball at a very high level, and what we would do is we would have a very intense practice, and then at the end of that intense practice, we would go over game time scenarios in which it was, 3 seconds left on the clock. You're down by 1. You need to score a bucket. What do? Well, you can only really get that scenario by actually doing it or finding a tool that will help to kind of mimic that, And so, we've talked about my electrical muscle stimulation device that I've set up. And what I do with some of my athletes is I will train them in the electrical muscle stimulation suit to mimic the end of a game. So like we did it with basketball, I do it with fighting as well. So, if you can imagine trying to punch a bunch of times at the end of a round because you want to win, you want to get as many points as you can, but you've got these, either the cuffs keeping you from being able to really go for it, or you've got the muscle activation of the suit pumping you up. It's really hard to kind of finish that. So it mimics it very well.
And just one more thing that, while we are talking about hypertrophy, which many times it's a problem, because when you start to build muscle on that, it doesn't guarantee, especially a bodybuilder, that you get the capillaries with it. So that's a two different issue. Like,
right.
Okay, now you have bigger muscle, but do you have the blood flow and the oxygen to it? But since here you are creating hypoxia, and as a hypoxia, certain factors like hypoxia inducible factor 1, they will go up, and that's creating the need to have more capillaries, right? Yeah. So the muscle will have the necessary amount of capillaries. So basically, that muscle is useful. That's what I'm trying to say here.
Absolutely. And that brings up another point. I'm glad you mentioned that, because some of the concerns or questions I get in terms of only strapping this on the arms or only strapping this on the legs is that, well, what if I want to train my abs, or I want to train my back, or,
Or should I put it on my neck?
Right.
Yeah.
right.
Well, if you ask this, probably you should. But the thing is this, that I think it's a very relevant question, because people think, that's very reductionist thinking, that if I put it on my arm, necessarily that arm will get the benefit. But the benefit comes through the hormonal system. It's a humoral response from the body, and then certain hormones and insulin-like growth factors and everything. It goes up, and it's systematic. And we see that because in athletes' case, when they are injured, and there's one leg we can work with, the other leg we cannot work with because of the cross result. Effect. Other leg will just get as much hypertrophy and humoral benefits. So that's not a big deal. Yes, your chest will also grow and your lat will also grow, but you have to work it. It's no question. Yeah. But doing pull-ups in it, it's probably the first idea I would not recommend, because you cannot put the amount of work in it until you get really tired that way. Yeah. So again, 30, 15, 15, 15 is probably the goal. That's what we do. With very advanced athletes, we do a 40, 30, 30. And then they don't like it, or we do supersets. So basically the same thing, 40, 30, 30 reps, and we are not doing the break, but we just walk to the different thing. And let's say you did bicep curls, now you go to the tricep push down, and it's really painful.
Yeah, look, just sitting here, the blood is rushing through, my hands. You can see it, and again, I talked about the capillary refill time. You see everything is working the way it's supposed to work. And it feels good. It feels like I just did 50 curls or something, and I've done just a handful, just some hand squeezes and maybe move the arms a little bit. But I think it's enough on Katsu. We've exhausted Katsu. We've had them on the show. If you're really curious about more about Katsu, hit either one of us up or go back to one of the previous episodes in which we talked to the guys of Katsu. But let's talk about some of the other types of training, because when you invited me to your home, I saw you've got saunas, you've got the clubs, the Indian clubs, you've got bow and arrows, you've got all kinds of cool things. So clearly there's a lot that you do. So what are some of the other things that you like to play around with or use?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest thing what we started to implement, again, about 7-8 years ago, I started to study Buteyko. It's a Russian breathing method under Patrick McEwen, who wrote many books, and he's a very good friend of mine. He's my teacher. And that definitely helped us to reach certain goals we could not reach without it. And that's either health goal or performance goal, but it's definitely created so much change. And it's for me, it was very shocking that to figure out, like, many of the very high level athletes, like I'm talking about the best in the world in the given sport, their breathing is horrible. And I'm not trying to be not nice in this. I mean, seriously, just horrible.
Yeah.
Because not some of them. I would say, like, most of the athletes, my own statistics, about 20% of them are completely dependent of nose drops or nose spray, and which is already a big question, like, why? And the other is, I would say almost 50% of them are having sleep issues and snoring, and even some of the high-level guys actually have sleep apnea. So, and I'm talking about high numbers. Now, our question was not my question. Our question was that if you cannot recover when you're sleeping, then why do you expect that you can perform top level on the field?
Yeah.
I mean, just simply it's not working. And then, and I'm not just talking about they have short sleep cycles, like less than, average by a study, high-level athletes are sleeping about 6.5 hours, which is, if you think about Federer, he's sleeping 11 hours. Okay, he's 39, but still, he knows it's an investment.
Yeah.
But most of our kids are thinking that it's a waste of time. And that's a different issue. It's a mentality of being professional or not. But again, while everybody's talking about today about sleeping, which is pretty cool, nobody talk about, like, the sleep based on your breathing. So if your breathing is off, your sleeping is off, and that's it. And even, there are all these sleep studies, you will figure out that the breathing is the problem. But then what to do with the breathing? So that's the big question. And this is where I think, Buteyko and Patrick McEwen has probably the best answers.
Love it. Yeah, we've talked about breath work. We've talked about a lot about sleep. I'm a big fan of in trying to improve sleep. Even what I'm currently exploring now is the work of trying to open up. So instead of supporting the head, more about supporting the neck in terms of sleeping, so that we can allow for the chin and the airways to open up a little bit better. Because I noticed in some of my last x-rays, when I was looking at my scoliosis, trying to figure out ways to improve it, I noticed that my neck is closely related to a military neck, which is that straight neck, lack of the lordosis that is needed there, natural lordosis in the neck. And so I'm like, okay, I have a few things that I could mess around with. And what I've started to do is now support the neck instead of the head. Because if you really think about it, as you lift your head, your chin naturally drops, which closes off a lot of the airways. And so that's why I think I've always shifted over to the side to try to get some kind of open airway. But now I find myself sleeping a lot better. My scores are better. My breathing is better. And I feel way more recovered. And also, I find myself in the same position when I went to sleep and then when I wake up, which is pretty cool.
So, well, what we know from research is, again from Russia, the highest tissue oxygenation is happening when you're on your side. So that's what we know. The left is the best, right is the second one. The worst is possibly, especially with the tendency of opening your mouth and snoring, is the back. Yeah. And in fact, the best actually is sitting, but nobody wants to sleep that way. But the interesting part is that, we also have the nose cycles. So every couple of hours, between 1 and 8 hours, our nose is cycling.
Yes.
So one of them is getting clogged a little bit and the other is, getting freed up. So that's also a thing that probably evolutionary means that we have to turn around. Otherwise, we would have the problem what the drunk people have when they get up after like 12 hours of completely dead sleeping and they don't feel their arms for hours because there was no any circulation. So probably this is how the body is trying to compensate for that. So keep twisting us in the air, in the bed. But definitely one of the most important thing is that making sure that the nose is open enough so you can have nose breathing while you sleep. And if you can't open it, which there are many tricks, by the way, then making sure that the mouth will not open anyway. So this is where we use certain type of tapes. Some of them are full tape, some of them are for the kids like different tape. But it's definitely helping, and we see that. And most people are thinking this is crazy, like, oh, you're taping your mouth. But, well, see that way, if you ever get kidnapped, you're ready. So,
yeah.
But seriously, that it's night and day. For most people, the difference between tape and not tape is night and day. But again, make sure that your nose is open. So don't just tape it.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of mouth taping, and I've done it for the better part of a year. And I really, really love it. I think it's definitely something people should look into more. And, I feel like I could just talk to you for hours. I want to chat about one thing quickly before we start to wrap up. And that's because I was talking to you about this isometric contraption that I built. And it's basically a wooden platform, and you use chains and steel bars and carabiners. And you were like, "Oh yeah, have you heard about the ISO chain?" And I was like, "That's the name of it," because I was literally looking for that. I had seen it somewhere before, somewhere online, and I could not remember the name of it. And all the searches I pulled up to try to find it was only bringing me to the homemade versions, right? And the old school versions with a power rack and things like that. So because of you mentioning that, I now have ordered, and it should be here any day now, the ISO chain. So that's something I'm going to definitely be talking about in the future on the podcast. In fact, I'm going to get some of the guys from ISO chain on the show. But one thing that is really cool that I actually brought with me is because of my constant need to research, I brought this ISO bow. And I have the ISO flow, the full setup with me. And I showed this to you, and I was like, yeah, like when I was researching it, this is what I came across, and I found this on Amazon, and what are your thoughts on it? And you were like, oh yeah, tell me about what you mentioned.
Yeah, so as I heard, I mean, I've been never, in any prison. I mean, besides teaching the security staff, but in Russia, this is what the inmates are using. I mean, something like this they create, and this is what they can use for being pretty freaky strong. Now, the very important part of isometric training is if you only use it in one range of motion, then you're going to be strong in one range of motion, and that's very important to understand. That the transfer is basically in about 30 degrees, now 15 degrees. So you have to use it in different positions, and that's what they do basically. So don't just get strong in one position, right, but being strong in all positions. So probably if you want to be strong in the full range of motion, you need 4 or 5 different positions.
Yes.
So I think it's very important to understand. And the other benefit, which is not really known, but for example, back then when it was difficult to survive certain Gs at for the pilots, what they did is they were squeezing the heck out of the stick, and it was actually normalizing the blood pressure. that very strong isometric hold is. So that actually about 10 years ago became an FDA approved anti-hypertension device where you can, it's a special squeezing device. You have to squeeze with a certain amount of force, hold it for a certain amount of time, and then it's actually lowering the blood pressure. So probably it's a good idea to mess with a little bit with the isometrics.
For sure.
Which again, there are some great material books on it, so probably it's worth to buy it. But I think it's a good stuff.
Yeah, it's really cool because to your point, it's you definitely want to look at training the different areas. And what I've been doing is training the weak points or the sticking points of different movements. And I've already noticed, like me doing handstand push-ups, I used to be able to do 3 or 4. And with a couple of weeks of training with this and my homemade unit, I was able to get it to a point where it's the sticking point of my handstand push-ups, and now I can do 9 or 10 reps much better than I was ever doing it before. So it translates as long as you help make it translate, I guess, right? So, okay, all right. Couple things I always ask people when they come onto the show. And I didn't get a chance to prep you for this, but it's all good. It's super fun. I always ask 2 questions at the end of the show. One is, what is your top 2 pet peeves? Like something that just gets under your skin. And I always ask this question because it allows me and also the listeners to understand a little bit deeper into the person, but also it helps you to be more aware when you're speaking with other people, realizing that, like, hey, this might be the most amazing person ever, but they also have a pet peeve. We all have pet peeves. And I'll give you an example. Mine is loud chewing. We call it smacking. So like when people are chewing food, you know, for me, it's literally like ringing in my ears and like nails on a chalkboard when I hear somebody going, and it's like I can't focus on what they're saying because all I can hear is that, right? That's my pet peeve. What's one of yours or 2 of yours?
What drives me nuts when people are talking about absolutes, that drives me nuts. I mean, seriously, because when they say like, this is it, and unless it's about God, who is absolute, I'm thinking like, I don't think so. I think there must be something else behind it. So that kills me, basically. Otherwise, I'm pretty easygoing. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right, nice. And then the last one is a much more positive. I always like to end on a positive note, but if you could just tell me something you're most grateful for.
My family. But since my son is here, he doesn't have to hear that now. He knows that. So yeah, it's something that, that, I mean, as a man, and I understand today probably it's not really popular to say that, but I see myself as somebody who is like a warrior who is doing his job to put food on the table, and even though I'm enjoying it, it's not always easy, but because I'm living for my hobby, so most people would think that it's 12 hours of fun, but it's not always fun. Mm-hmm. But that will be it. So thankful for it. I can do what I like to do. And it's, again, my father, my grandfather was working in a mine. So you might understand that for me, it's, I compare to everything to that. Like, they were working under like 1,200 meters, right? So what could be worse than that? Mm-hmm. Anything else is better than that. So if I'm better than that, I'm fine. So that would be there goes my gratitude.
I love it. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure. Before we wrap up, could you please let people know where they can best find out more about you and what you're doing?
Especially for English speakers, we have a podcast called Upgraded You, and while 90% of the recorded material is Hungarian, but sometimes because of selfish reasons, I can reach top level English speaker experts like last time Thomas Seyfried, Dominic D'Agostino, Jason Fung, Ben Bickman. So these are big names from biohacker community or else, And this is where probably they can see interesting interviews with these top-level scientists, probably from a different angle that normally they get questions.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, upgraded you, Peter Lakatos. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for coming onto the show. And to all the listeners, thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. If you found this useful, then please feel free to share. Don't forget to subscribe and give us a review. All right, until next time, this is Simply Walk the Talk. Peace.
Walk the talk, talking facts. Move like me, but I move a little fast. Make my move, here to last. Fasten these seatbelts, I'm coming past. Take care of me, longevity. Hack my biology, better believe. Walking the talk, soul, mind, and body connected. Better come give us a listen. Better come give us a minute or two. Open the box up, we giving you tools. Giving your engine the fuel that it needs. Breathing into it, it's autoimmune. Make a connection, we're stronger in two. Making us one of a kind of a few. Work on the mind, but show me your moves. If you do what you say, you know what to do. Yeah.
Simply walk the talk.